Welcome everyone to the Amherst Irish Association's March event. Fáilte roimh isteach, agus banachtaí féile fádraigh oribh go léir, and happy St. Patrick's Day a little after the fact. Today is the day when the Holyoke Parade is taking place, and many of our members participate in that parade. But as always, our events are available, our recordings are available on our YouTube site, Amherst Irish YouTube, if you want to view it again, or if you want to tell your friends about it. My name is Ida O'Carroll, and I'm here to welcome you and to just tell you the layout of our day. We are honoured to have today a wonderful scholar and a local lad from nearby Springfield. His name is Ty Gamble-Eddington, and he's currently a Mitchell Scholar, a scholarship named after Senator George Mitchell of Maine. He's currently a Mitchell Scholar at Trinity College, Dublin, studying for an MPhil in race, ethnicity and conflict. And we're delighted to have Ty as part of our series. We have decided, because he's currently in Trinity, he's there, you'll see him on his screen, in Front Square, in his rooms off Front Square in Trinity. We decided to pre-record, just in case there'd be any hitch on our end or on his end in terms of technology. And I want to commend and announce once again, as always, my gratitude to our own Tim Goodhind, who has arranged all the editing of the piece, and has also facilitated the inclusion of an introduction by our first speaker, who's Professor Paul Musgrave, himself a Mitchell Scholar in the early 2000s, who's currently a Professor of Political Science at UMASS here in Amherst. So our wonderful scholar Ty in Trinity at the moment, a Mitchell Scholar, will give us his impressions of Ireland across borders. But before he does so, and before we play that recording, you'll hear Professor Paul Musgrave talk a little bit about the Mitchell Scholarship, its idea and its evolution as part of the Good Friday Agreement, which was the peace agreement to the conflict or the war in Northern Ireland. So without any further ado, I'll ask Tim to roll it there, please, and welcome to you all. And after the film runs, the video runs, Ty is available here to answer your questions. We'll have a Q&A. Okay, Gora míle maith agaibh go léir.
Hello, my name is Paul Musgrave, and I'm an assistant professor of political science at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I'm also a George Mitchell Scholar, class of 2004, and I'm delighted to be here to talk more about the Good Friday Agreement, the U.S.-Ireland Alliance, and the George Mitchell Scholarship. As many of you will remember, during the 20th century, the status of Ireland, and particularly of Northern Ireland, became a subject of a huge amount of contention and violence. And from the 1970s until the 1990s, Ireland and the UK were racked by violence, committed on both sides of a dispute over how Northern Ireland's status would be resolved. By the 1990s, the violence had grown to be so large that the British government under Tony Blair invited the US government to play a part in the peace process. And a critical figure in that process was George Mitchell. George Mitchell had been a senator from Maine. He had been a majority leader of the US Senate. He was a trusted figure, experienced in politics, experienced in negotiations, and he served as a personal representative of US President Bill Clinton during the peace talks. In 1998, after weeks and months in deliberations, Senator Mitchell brokered a deal that brought almost everybody, Irish, British, Loyalist, Unionist, almost everybody together in order to put an end to the violence. And this was known as the Good Friday Agreement. As a result of this, not only did the violence stop, but it was felt that there needed to be a larger way, a more permanent way of cementing the relationship between Ireland and the United States, and also of finding an appropriate way to honor Senator Mitchell's contribution to Irish peace. And this is where an assistant, a legislative aide to Senator Ted Kennedy, who had also played a major role in all of this, Trina Vargo, came up with the idea of the U.S.-Ireland alliance as a foundation that would help nurture and broker U.S.-Irish relations, and of the George Mitchell Scholarship Program that would be funded by the U.S., U.K., and Irish governments, as well as private benefactors, and would serve as a way of honoring Senator Mitchell's legacy in Ireland. The George Mitchell Scholarship brings American students and graduates, you can be up to, I think, 30 years old to apply for the Mitchell Scholarship, to Ireland, the entire island, for a year to study. I myself went to University College Dublin for a year to study Irish politics, which is something that I found has been not only enriching to my life, but also to my career. Some of my classmates were at Trinity, and in fact, one of them is now an instructor, a professor of Irish drama there. Other folks went to the north and they became experts in conflict resolution, or to the west where they learned more about zoology, and they've since gone on to major careers in which they've made use of this. And everybody who goes to Ireland as a Mitchell Scholar comes back with a little bit of a connection, a direct connection to the island, to the Irish government, to Irish society. And that has been one of the ways in which a new generation of leaders who may not have had anything to do with Ireland before they went has come back to the United States and has carried that connection directly to Ireland into their careers, into a wide range of areas. And they've really helped cement those bonds in a way that will prove lasting even as other bonds begin to wear out or need to be replaced. And this is the idea of the U.S.-Ireland Alliance. This is the idea of the George Mitchell Scholarship. It's a way to honor peace building. It's a way to honor the connections between Ireland and the United States, which run so deep. And it's a way to make sure that those connections are broadened and deepened in a way that, it's very hard to imagine being done through other means. So this is why the George Mitchell Scholarship is important. This is why it's important to have folks over there. It's not only important for the United States, it's also important for Ireland, because American students like myself, when we go to Ireland, we learn a lot from them. We also try to bring something of the United States to act as representatives of the United States. And I'll also note that since the George Mitchell Scholarship Program was inaugurated, which helped to put some Irish universities on the map, some of them were already there, others have been moved into a more prominent position, the number of U.S. students studying in some degree programs has risen tremendously. So that's really been a two-way street. These relationships are broad and deep, and they really last. And that's why the George Mitchell Scholarship Program is important. It certainly meant a lot to me. It's given me a connection to a place, to a country that is so rich in culture and heritage and has fascinating politics. And I really think that it's a great program, and I'm wonderful to hear that Ty is part of this, and that he's gone from Springfield to Ireland. And I hope that we can continue to make this scholarship program work, that we can continue to build those ties, and that we can have a relationship between the United States and Ireland that represents a full spectrum: commercial, artistic, cultural, political, scientific, of relationships. And that's what I think that the U.S.-Ireland Alliance and the George Mitchell Scholarship are about. Thank you so much for having me here.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Ty. I was born and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I'm currently studying at Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. So I guess the big question is kind of, why do I want to go to Ireland, or why did I want to go since I'm already here? The immediate response is I have a pretty strong family history in Ireland that I've really enjoyed to explore through my grandmother, who's done a lot of the research on the groundwork in order to get citizenship, but also through things like ancestry and through data records and archives. So my grandmother and her brother were both born in the US, but they're naturalized citizens through ancestry. My grandmother recently took a DNA test, came back 100% Irish. She was very excited by that fact. So she's through and through an Irish descendant. And so my grandmother's done a lot of the groundwork in terms of tracing our family history. But recently I was able to actually use Ancestry to find lost relatives of my great-grandmother. She was unaware she had any relatives in the United States. She grew up in an orphanage outside of Boston. And so I was able to use Ancestry to track down some of those Irish American relatives across the United States. And that was a really amazing experience for me and my family. Besides that kind of ancestry aspect, I've been really engaged and really interested in the Irish American community because of my grandmother. She takes a lot of pride in being Irish American. She has a little photo of John F. Kennedy on her refrigerator. It's been there as long as I can remember. When I was a kid, she used to tell me, would you like some Irish tea? It was never quite actually Irish. It was just Lipton tea, but she loved to call it Irish tea. And so I grew up with this sense of being Irish American in the United States. During St. Patrick's Day, she'd make corned beef and cabbage. We go to see the St. Patrick's Day parade. My uncles would all gather around drinking beer, whatnot. Not Guinness, unfortunately, but drinking beer, American beers usually. And so I grew up with this kind of omnipresent sense of what being Irish American was, in addition to obviously being African American and the strong influence that played on me. And so with that being said, kind of my background, my family history, I got really interested in the academic aspect of Ireland as well. I'm really interested in peace studies. I'm interested in the ways that states can kind of oppress groups, in particular minority groups within society. And so in undergrad, I took this amazing course on Ireland and Irish history. I got to learn about the British plantations in Ireland, the ways in which Irish Catholics were subjected to various means of kind of domination by the British Empire. And that really got me interested in being able to study in Ireland. So come my senior year, I applied for the Fulbright Scholarship at UCD, and I also applied for the Mitchell Scholarship at Trinity College. I was very lucky to become a finalist for the Mitchell and then to ultimately win the Mitchell, and to get to come over here to pursue an MPhil in race, ethnicity, and conflict at Trinity College, Dublin. As I said earlier, the MPhil has been around since about the 1990s, and it's really unique in that within the field of sociology, it focuses entirely on race and ethnicity and the ways in which that plays into kind of the creation of the modern state, the ways in which people kind of engage with minority groups and whatnot. And so that's been one really amazing way that I've been able to connect with Ireland, to connect with the history of Ireland while here. So the MPhil looks at things like sectarian violence in Northern Ireland, the peace process, the colonization of Ireland by the British Empire, and even the rise of the Celtic Tiger and recent rises of immigration within the island, which have dramatically changed the demographics a lot more so than I think I was expecting coming over. I was expecting a fairly homogenous country, and I got met with something very different, especially in terms of going to Dublin. So Ireland as a whole, and Trinity College Dublin in particular, were with its colonial history as a Protestant institution where the British elite were supposed to be trained to kind of rule over Ireland, make them both really a perfect place for me, who's interested in this academically, but also someone who is of Irish American descent, who really wants to study that heritage and the way in which Ireland is today. As I'm sure plenty of you know, being Irish American, I think, is oftentimes very different than modern day Ireland. There's different perceptions of what being Irish are and the way that culture influences. And so I wanted to kind of get on the ground and see how it is that modern day people in Ireland, how do they feel about their identity, their culture, the issues that we talk about in the US. And coming from a state like Massachusetts, we're considered one of the most Irish states. In Springfield, we have the Irish flag in Forest Park. My congressman, Richie Neal, is the head of the Committee on Good Relations with Ireland. And so there's a very strong and historic kind of Irish American community in Massachusetts, which makes it even more relevant for me. So with that being said, I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the ways in which I've been able to form connections with Ireland while being in Ireland, primarily through my academic studies, but also through a lot of cultural exchange and different work I've done on the ground in Dublin, such as plays and other things. So I'll start off talking a bit about kind of just my arrival in Ireland and how I got over here. So I've been in Ireland for about 6 months now. I was one of the first Mitchell scholars to arrive this past August. I came to campus early, hoping to attend orientation. Little did I know that COVID-19 would force it all online, and I failed to register, so I just sat in my dorm room by myself. And I would occasionally go outside to the Campanile, which is this beautiful building in Front Square at Trinity, to watch the orientation online. At first, the campus was really quiet with no one here, and so I kind of got my own bearings, getting to explore the terrain, exploring Dublin and whatnot. That quickly changed as everyone came back on campus, and as they gradually lifted restrictions throughout the fall. And so since then, I've really been able to immerse myself in my classes and also in Dublin and kind of get to know people around the island. And so kind of the main way I've been able to really engage with Ireland, I would say, is through my coursework. So in particular, in the fall, I took a course called Conflict Studies, and I focused on Northern Ireland in particular. It was taught by a professor named Andrew Finley, and he focused on Northern Ireland. He's from Northern Ireland. And he talked about kind of the intersections of identity and the way that that's formed. So someone coming from the United States, I have this perception of the Troubles, right? These horrible events that happened, they occurred. There were violence between Catholics and Protestants, and ultimately the Good Friday Agreement and various other agreements kind of brought this together to create peace on the island of Ireland. While that is true in many regards, it's also very simplified in many regards. The notions we have about Protestant and Catholic aren't always as clear as they seem, and they often are kind of smudged by the ways in which people see themselves. So the Troubles was a conflict that lasted some 40 plus years, and it killed over 1.8 million people, and it involved over 1.8 million people. 3,800 people died in the conflicts, and tens of hundreds were injured or affected. And so during this class, I got the opportunity to go to Northern Ireland. We went to the Wake Trauma Center. We got to talk to survivors of the Troubles who were subject to violent by paramilitary groups. And so kind of throughout the Troubles, the base history is pretty much, you have the historical legacy of British colonialism in Ireland. Many consider Ireland to be the first colony of the British Empire. And so you have this history of primarily Protestant people from Scotland, from England, from Wales coming over to Ireland and being given very large swaths of land and very large amounts of influence and power within the island. So after the Republic declared its independence and you have Northern Ireland still within the UK, sectarian violence breaks out. That's partially due to religion, but a lot of it isn't actually due to religious differences. It's mostly due to differences in terms of the ways in which those groups are seen and the ways in which they're racialized. In particular, Irish Catholics are racialized by the British Empire as being kind of this homogenous group. They're violent, they're loyal to the Pope, they don't want to be part of society, and they're kind of relegated and segregated in different ways throughout Northern Ireland. So with that being said, kind of this larger context of these two groups who on the surface have religious differences, but in reality isn't really religious differences. It's differences in terms of economic status, it's differences in terms of opportunity and access to work, it's differences in terms of the ways in which British society and Irish society as a whole views them. You have this kind of large-scale violence that breaks out in Northern Ireland with a series of bombs and various terrorist attacks, but also you have pretty terroristic acts by the British government in terms of repression by sending in the military and various other things. So in the context of all that, we got to talk a lot about kind of memory, right? So how do the Irish in Northern Ireland, how do they view themselves? How do they understand the conflict? And it's something that's really powerful because in Northern Ireland in particular, and this can be said, and I think in many post-conflict zones, but also in the US to some extent, there's a kind of a failure to create a shared identity or a shared community. And so there's been more peace walls built in Northern Ireland since the end of the Troubles than there were throughout the Troubles. If you go there now, the walls are still very high. The gates close, with the exception of the center of Belfast. The gates all around Belfast close at certain times throughout the week. And so it's still a very divided society, but also a very integrated society, as funny as that may be. The center of Belfast is more integrated than it's ever been in terms of the two groups intermingling, but the suburbs are not quite the same. But when you talk about kind of identity and the way you do it, there was never a truth and reconciliation committee or things like that, like there were in other places. And so there's not really a shared history. There's not really a shared identity that's came about from the Troubles. And so when you go around Belfast and you go around different parts of Northern Ireland, in particular, if you go down Shankill Road or the other places in Belfast, you see these murals painted primarily by paramilitary groups on each side. And they just depict completely different worlds almost of the conflicts, of the people who did them, of the people who were involved in the conflicts. You'll see, I mean, and the most striking things are really the flags. You'll see on the Irish side or on the Catholic side, there's the Irish flags for the Republic and there's Palestinian flags. And on the Protestant side, there's British flags and Israeli flags. And kind of scattered throughout are different discourses glorifying paramilitary soldiers, the actions they did, vilifying the other group. And so there's lots in terms of shared memory that hasn't been addressed. And there's lots in terms of fragmentation within the memory of Northern Ireland. That's really interesting coming from perspective of conflict studies, but also that's very enlightening because I think when people talk about the Troubles, they talk about it as something that's over, but it's never really ended, especially in the minds of many people who experienced the Troubles. There was never reconciliation. Paramilitary groups were never held accountable. The British military was never held accountable. It was kind of just a moving forward without really a recognition of the past. And so the trauma of the Troubles and kind of that conflict it resonates a lot with people in Northern Ireland. It resonates a lot within my discipline and within the MPhil program because it is such a heavy topic within the conversation. Talking about things like disassociation and the ways in which people integrate things into their mind to kind of make sense of the world around them. So that's been the way I primarily kind of engage with Ireland through my academic studies, being able to go to Northern Ireland, seeing the difference also in the culture. The culture in Northern Ireland compared to the Republic of Ireland are very different, right? Just the way that they talk about things, the way that the sports they prefer. If you go to the north, a lot of the Protestant sections, they prefer British sports, they prefer rugby, they prefer the sports that are inherently British because they think that it aligns their identity more heavily, versus if you go to the Republic or other parts, there's heavy emphasis on Gaelic sports, on Irish language and things like that. And so there's just lots of parallels you see in Ireland that make it not quite as homogenous as people think. And I think that the ways in which Ireland is different in the modern day, in particular different identities and different cultures that coexist, I think is very telling of kind of modern day Ireland and really what it's like to really live on this island, to engage with people. And that's something very different than what you get in the US. Oftentimes the Irish American community is very kind of homogenous. People, they don't all think the same, but it's very similar in terms of your goals. What are you talking about? What are you engaging with, right? There's this shared identity of Irish as a whole, and there's not really this disassociation with different events. And while that's true to a large extent, especially in the Republic of Ireland, it also varies a lot depending on where you are within the island. So that course was really important in kind of understanding that. I've taken other courses as well that have been really cool and really interesting. In particular, Ireland's a really interesting place to be, and Dublin's a really interesting place to be since the Celtic Tiger, since the rise of the Irish economy. Historically, Ireland has been a country of people leaving. They leave, they immigrate throughout the British Empire and throughout the United States. And so the reason why the Irish American community is so strong in the United States is because of the large number of people who fled to the United States during the famine and during the conflicts and during various other intervals throughout Irish history. And so that's created a very strong Irish community abroad, right? Irish Americans, Irish Australians, etc. But recently that's changed very strongly as Ireland got their independence and as they began to build their economy, right? Breaking away from the British Empire. Historically, the economic and industrial base of the island of Ireland has been in Belfast. It's been kind of the industrial base, but also the commercial base. After the Republic declared their independence, Dublin gradually became the center kind of commerce, of technology. If you walk around the River Liffey, right in the center of Dublin, you'll see Google headquarters and Facebook headquarters, and you'll see Deloitte, and you'll see KPMG and all these other companies that are very large in the US. And they're based in Dublin, and they are increasingly coming to Dublin. And so there's a very large economic upturn in Ireland, and in particular in Dublin. And with that has come a large influx of immigration and a large deflux of emigration. So people are stopping to leave a lot, and people are coming in a lot. And so you have a lot of new immigrants. In particular, there's a very large Brazilian population in Dublin, and there's also a growing African population in Dublin. And so it creates this very diverse and dynamic kind of city in a country that is historically fairly homogenous in terms of its religious and cultural identity. And so that for me has been really amazing because I did not expect that coming to Dublin. From what I've seen, from what I heard, I was expecting to come to Ireland and for them to just all look like my grandma. I was expecting a bunch of my grandma everywhere on the street, people of varying ages who look like my grandma. I was very surprised to see that's not quite the case at all. The country is still very majority Irish Catholic, but there is a growing population that's very diverse, a growing population that is increasingly visible, especially in cities like Dublin. And for me, that was really amazing because you could go, perfect example is when I came to Ireland, I brought all my hair supplies in my bag. I was like, I'm going to need all of this. There's no place to resupply, right? It's impossible to find Cantu, which is it's a hair supply that people of color, some people of color tend to use. I was like, I'm going to have to bring a bunch of it. I go to St. Stephen's Green. It's about a 5-minute walk. You go down Grafton Street to St. Stephen's Green, and you go into St. Stephen's Green Mall. And in Boots, the store, there's Cantu, a whole aisle of it. And part of that, I think, to my surprise, was because the country is becoming so diverse so quickly. That is a product that is in high demand because that population, those segments of the country are growing and increasingly looking for those products. And so the homogeneity of the country is something that really surprised me, or the lack, therefore, of homogeneity, shall I say, of the country is something that really surprised me. And it's something that's increasingly interesting and something that's increasingly studied in Ireland. And there's also an increasingly large Black Irish population, those being Black people born in Ireland, not just immigrants. And that's been something that's kind of historically been growing over time. Ireland was always a place to go, in particular for elites in Africa who wanted to educate their children but didn't want to send them to London. They'd send them to Trinity or to some other schools on the island of Ireland. And so those have been kind of the two main ways I've been able to explore Ireland, kind of bridging my perception of it as an Irish American and the reality what Ireland is like in the modern day through my academic studies. And the last way I'll say I really got to bridge it is the political difference. And so I think the Irish American community, in my experience, has been, it's fairly moderate in the United States in many regards. But our moderate is very different than the Irish moderate. And so in Ireland, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and also Sinn Féin, which actually got the largest amount of seats in the last election, are all, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are both considered moderate right parties, but they're quite left compared to what we would consider right in America. And so you have this growing, I think, difference in terms of the way in which Irish Americans, or not all Irish Americans, but many Irish Americans in the diaspora and what Ireland views as politics, in particular when you talk about issues relating to the Catholic Church, when you talk about issues relating to abortion, to gay rights and things like that. Ireland is extremely progressive in terms of gay rights. They've been pretty leading in terms of abortion rights, and increasingly with the various scandals that have come out about the Catholic Church in the past decades, they've increasingly secularized themselves and have increasingly kind of been more open to kind of looking at things from a secular view and to being more engaged with other, whether they be other faiths or other identities or other ways of looking at things. And so that was something that also really kind of startled me, because I was expecting to come to a fairly homogenous, fairly conservative Catholic country. And what I got was a fairly liberal, fairly diverse country with a really quickly growing economy and lots of different ways to engage on the ground. So those have been the ways I've really engaged in my studies, but I've also been able to engage pretty intimately kind of with the culture of Ireland through traveling and also through going to different cultural events. So first I'll talk about the cultural events because those have been kind of my favorite. Dublin, like London, is really a city of theater. There are theaters scattered throughout the city. In particular, the Abbey Theatre, the National Theatre, is phenomenal. There's the Gate Theatre, the Gaiety Theatre, there's Schmock Valley Theatre, and various other smaller theaters scattered throughout the city. And so throughout my time here, I've been very lucky and also very eager to see Irish theater. My friend Joy, who is also a Mitchell Scholar, is actually in the Lear. And so she's doing a directing program at the theater. So I go to lots of shows with her. And so Irish theater is really interesting because it's very insular in many regards, especially at the Abbey Theatre. It focuses on a lot of old Irish topics. It focuses on the 1916 rebellion, the Troubles. It focuses on what is Ireland's history like. But what it doesn't often focus on is what is modern Ireland like in terms of the growing diversity, the growing kind of minority populations, and the ways in which Ireland is rapidly changing. Nevertheless, Ireland theater is highly recommended by me, and it is phenomenal. I've gone to probably almost 24 shows at this point, ranging from like classic shows like The Lion, the Witch, the Wardrobe, to going to see Samuel Beckett's Endgame. I'm supposed to be going to a show tonight that's a series of 3 monologues about the Troubles with my MPhil class. And so there's lots of kind of really amazing shows to see in Ireland that give you a lot of insights in terms of the ways in which Ireland remembers its own history and the ways in which it connects with its heritage and the way it connects with its past. And they're also very affordable in many regards. They're not very overpriced like they are in cities like New York City or London. They're very affordable. And so those have been really interesting ways that I've engaged on the ground. Also, before December, all of the national heritage sites were free due to COVID. And so I got to go to all of the classic touristy spots in Dublin. I got to, well, St. Patrick's Cathedral wasn't free, but I got to go to St. Patrick's Cathedral. I got to go to Dublin Castle. I went to Newgrange. I went to the Hill of Tara, right? All these really cool historical sites around Ireland and around, in particular, Dublin because of accessibility. But they're really interesting because they show you the Ireland of the past, which is what I thought I would see a lot of in the present day. So when I go there, I see the Hill of Tara, I see these Celtic sites, I see these Irish sites that I thought would kind of be all encompassing in Ireland. And they certainly are there and they're well preserved. They're really amazing to go to. The Hill of Tara is quite cold. It was the first time I've seen snow in Ireland, to be quite honest. There's not much snow in this country, but the Hill of Tara, for some reason, has quite a lot of it. But they're remnants of kind of this historical past that Ireland has tried very hard to preserve. And they're really interesting because not only are there legacies of the past, but a lot of these very historical sites tell the history, not only of the Celtic people, but of the ways in which Ireland has changed historically, the ways in which Ireland has converted through St. Patrick, the ways in which Ireland has been colonized and dominated by the British, and the ways in which they try to legitimize their dominance over the island. And so they're very interesting in that way, and I've really enjoyed seeing them. My family actually came during my winter break, my grandmother, my mom, my little sister, and my cousin, and we kind of went around different places. Lots of accessibility issues. My mom cannot climb up the hill of Tara. I was grossly unprepared in terms of layers because I was not expecting it to be that cold. It's really not, like, it's a hill. It's not as high as it, like, it's called a hill for a reason. It is a hill, but the weather just gets colder and colder at every foot you take. It's almost like you're going up a mountain. It's very interesting, but it's very beautiful on top. And there's just lots of places to go. So in addition to kind of like the theater, and in addition to kind of these sites I've been able to travel to, I've also made it a kind of a priority to travel throughout the different counties. I still have yet to go to Limerick, unfortunately, but I've gone to Belfast quite a few times. I've gone to Galway, gone to all of those kind of historical sites like Blarney Castle and Cork, and I'd like to go to the Aran Islands, but haven't yet figured out the logistics in terms of getting a boat from Galway over there. And so there's just lots to kind of explore throughout the island, and there's lots to really engage with in terms of heritage. And the country differs so greatly based on the city you're from. I could honestly say there's no city quite like Dublin. In particular, the feeling you get being in Dublin is so very unique compared to even cities like Galway. Galway is considered the most traditionally Irish city in Ireland by many. The feelings you get are just very different. And I think it's interesting because the island is quite small, I think, when we think about it in an American context, but it varies so very much based on the county you're in. And it's very interesting because of the subtle kind of cultural differences between the counties that I really enjoyed being able to explore. And it's kind of been like one of the highlights of my time in Ireland. And with that being said, the cultural aspects are very interesting to me, in particular, the linguistic differences. I often find myself being a bit confused at certain things that Irish people say in colloquial terms, but I've grown accustomed to some of the sayings, like it will be good crack. That one caught me quite off guard. Crack, C-A-R-A-I-C. So crack, not as in crack cocaine, which is what I thought it was for quite some time. I was very confused for a lot of my initial stages here, but the kind of sayings like it will be great crack or things like that, I think have been things I've tried to adjust to, and I think I've done a pretty good job at them. But they're also very interesting in terms of kind of the linguistic heritage of the words, where they come from. It's so very different. And so those have been kind of the ways I've engaged Ireland through traveling. I've engaged Ireland through my studies, and I've engaged with Ireland kind of culturally. Besides those aspects, I've also met some really amazing Irish friends here who I've enjoyed going out with virtually every weekend. Guinness is one of my new favorite drinks. It's quite strong, but you grow used to it quite quickly, I should say. But I've had lots of fun kind of engaging with the community within Ireland, and in particular within Dublin, which is extremely welcoming. I mean, my mother even came over here, like I said, during winter break. And my mother's not one who's particularly a fan of Europe. She tends to prefer to just go to a beach. She says, let's go to Florida, let's go to the Caribbean. I just want to spend my whole time on the beach. And she came over to Ireland and she said, I absolutely love it. She said, the people are so nice. It is a bit chilly, she did say that. But she said the people are so nice. She's had an amazing experience. She hasn't met one mean person. And so that has been kind of the thing that's encompassed my entire time, just the friendliness of the people. They're so genuinely kind. They're interested in kind of engaging with what you have to say. And they're interested in learning more kind of about other people and about, I think, Americans in particular, but kind of about other people more generally. And so those have been kind of the central ways that I've engaged with Ireland. And I just thought of actually this one other story. And so we were sitting in class actually a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about Ireland and kind of the ways in which Irish people identify. And I always find it very interesting to actually have, obviously, Irish people within my class. It'd be very interesting for a group of foreigners to talk about Ireland as an entity. But talking about the ways in which the Irish have changed the way they see themselves. So I talked about earlier how the Troubles are very influential in the memory, and the ways in which the Celtic Tiger and the economic development has really spurred kind of this growing diversity. But with that growing diversity, and also with the growing liberalism of the country, also comes, I think, a more insular version or insular vision of what Ireland is. And so you see this in particular with things like the passing of the Citizenship Bill, which changed the rights of Ireland for citizenship to juris sanguinis, which is a right by blood. So you have to, for example, I could apply to become an Irish citizen and it would be fast tracked, but someone who moved to Ireland after and who has no Irish connections would have a longer period of time to become a citizen because they don't have Irish blood in them. They're not Irish descendants. And so it's they took away the being born in Ireland makes you Irish, kind of how we have in the US, and they made it so towards you can become naturalized, obviously, but the only way to become a citizen besides that is to have Irish blood, in particular your grandparents or your great-grandparents, if they're citizens, or your parents. And so talking about the implications of that, kind of where did that come from? Why did they change the bill, right? And so that coincides with a lot of discussions that we have about the growing diversity of Ireland and their movement towards trying to kind of maintain this Irish heritage, this Irish identity that is really important to them. And you see that very apparently they've made it oftentimes in juxtaposition to the British, right? So after independence, they intentionally did a Gaelic revival, focusing very heavy on Irish language and Irish culture. They made actually during independence, they asked the British to change their flag as well. They asked them to take out the cross of St. Patrick and to just have an X on their flag because they didn't want kind of the imposition, the symbolic imposition of the British over the Irish on their flag. British never changed their flag, but nevertheless, there's been this inherent kind of move towards maintaining and amplifying Irishness and Irish heritage and Irish culture and Irish language. And that's something that I think has become increasingly prevalent, especially when you have this growing diversity of the country, kind of figuring out who are we as Irish people. And this is a question that they're increasingly coming into encounter with, and they haven't historically had to because they've been such a homogenous country, because they've had people mostly leaving and not many coming. And so it's very interesting when you look at things like Irish theater, when you look at things like Irish politics, and you have this very liberal, I'll say, kind of take on the way in which we should do immigration, the way in which we should progress things like healthcare, the ways in which we progress things like Social Security and things like that. But at the same time, there's this inherent, almost conservative nature to preserve an Irishness that is quintessentially Irish. And so that's kind of like this ongoing dynamic in Irish politics and also in Irish culture. And I find it very interesting. And I've talked to a lot of other Mitchells in different fields who talked about it as well. Like when I mentioned the theater earlier, Irish theater is very insular, but also very kind of rich in heritage and culture. But it hasn't caught up to the way American theater is very critical and very outlooking in terms of where it is. And so you'll have things in Ireland, plays that talk about the Troubles. They talk about what is it like to be Irish, but they don't necessarily make the connection to what is it like to be a modern Irish person, or what is it like to be growing up in a multicultural society, and how is that changing the way you perceive Irishness. And so that's something I think is very interesting. I think that'll change over time as kind of the growing diversity of the country becomes more normalized, kind of a move towards that kind of more multicultural society, shall I say. But that's more or less all I have to say. Those are the different ways in which I've connected with Ireland. I'll be in Ireland until about July, at which point I will head back home for a few months. And then I'm going to head over to the UK for a separate program. But those have been the main ways in which I've engaged with Ireland. I've got to learn a lot about myself as a person and the ways in which I identify. And the real differences, I think, in Irish American and Irish culture, even things like St. Patrick's Day. I was like, oh, do you guys cook? My Irish friends were like, we do not cook. That's not what we do. My Irish friends like, we're going to go to the pub all day. And I was like, okay, that I could work with that. It's not quite what I expected, because back home, St. Patrick's Day in particular is one of the few holidays my family makes very large meals for us to eat. There's, of course, drinking, but the meal is also a very big part that I look forward to. And so kind of those subtle cultural differences I find very interesting. And I've had the privilege of kind of being able to explore what does it mean to be Irish American in an Irish context, actually being here, and be able to explore my identity kind of within the context of Ireland, and the ways in which Irish people see themselves in various ways.
Great job, Ty. You can unmute yourself there because we'll be ready to roll. Fascinating connections, fascinating critique of Ireland as experienced through your eyes, and how it might be different to those impressions or visions of Ireland of those who reside on this side of the Atlantic. I want to open up now to questions from the audience, and we've dispensed with the chat function. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and I will come to you and unmute you, because Tim has made me a co-host. So if anybody's sitting on a question, or give yourself a moment to formulate a question. Anybody ready to roll? Well, maybe I'll start with one for you first, Ty, because I thought it was very interesting about the tension between Ireland, modern Ireland, 21st century Ireland, seeking to be a liberal democracy and a progressive one in terms of its moves, a referendum on marriage equality, a referendum on abortion rights, and yet this desire to cement an idea of Irishness. And I'm curious about if you think this is a pre-Christian, a reversal back to the pre-Christian, rather than the conservative Irishness that is exemplified in a Catholic Christian society. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I would say, I don't think it is necessarily. I would say that I think most Irish people, I mean, it's changing across the world. I mean, even in the US in terms of who identifies as religious, I think most Irish people, or at least a lot of them, still identify as Christian, whether it be Catholic or Protestant. And I think that's something they still value a lot. I think the main difference is a general discontent with the role that Christianity has played in politics and in governance. And so when you see the Magdalene laundries, when you see the multiple sexual assault allegations against the Catholic Church, there's just been kind of a large disconnect, I think, between what they want the role they want the church to play. I think a lot of people are still very religious, but they want the church to stay in the church's place and not to necessarily cross that boundary into politics. But I would say the church is still pretty big here. It just doesn't play the role that it used to play. So the Irish government used to relegate a lot of the public responsibilities to the Catholic Church, whether that be education, whether it be social welfare, etc. And so they've largely stopped doing that. And so I would say it's more so moving towards a liberal democracy, the process of it, that being having a secular government, than necessarily kind of giving up their Christian identity.
Yeah, I'd add, if according to Fintan O'Toole of the Irish Times last month, the latest figures on Irish practicing Catholics is 17% of the population is considered practicing Catholic. So
yeah.
It may be in name, but not in practice. Okay.
Yeah, I would say I would say a lot of people identify with it more like culturally. So they have the idea of like, I grew up in a Catholic household, I'm a Catholic, even though maybe I'm not a practicing Catholic. But you'd see similar trends to that even in the United States in terms of religiosity. Lots of people say, oh, well, I'm Christian, or I'm Baptist, or I'm this, but they don't go to church, they don't practice, they don't necessarily have that same attachment to the church in terms of getting tithes or whatnot. And so it's an interesting phenomenon because you can see it in Ireland, where it's kind of most prominent considering how religious the state used to be in the past, but you kind of see it across the board in the US and really throughout Western democracies in Europe.
Okay, anybody else sitting on a question? Would you like to raise your hand? Lovely, I see you. Joan O'Brien, I'm unmuting you there.
Thank
You're not unmuted?
Oh, sorry. I unmuted myself, but I guess I failed.
Perfect.
I first wanted to just say, Ty is a former student. I was lucky enough to teach him several years ago in high school, and it's not at all a surprise to hear, to see this continued insatiable curiosity and ability to really suss out nuance in his reporting. And so it's fascinating to me. And, obviously it's Irish heritage. My brother lived in Ireland for a while, so it's really been interesting to to listen to this. And I'm wondering, Ty, if any of the, when you talk about the culture, is there any similar kind of rural urban, not divide necessarily, but do you see a different culture in the rural areas of Ireland, or have you not been able to access them as easily as the urban areas? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I'd say there's a very strong urban rural divide in Ireland. I'd say the description I gave of Ireland is very much an Ireland centered on cities, that being Dublin, Limerick, Galway, etc. But when you go into the more rural communities, they're still extremely friendly. They're very nice, right? They're not overly aggressive like you may find in some places in the US, but there is that lack of, I would say, diversity. It's a lot more homogenous. It's a lot more Irish Catholics, traditionally Irish in terms of where they're coming from, etc. So there is certainly a divide in terms of, I guess, the experience. I think that's because of a large flow of immigration to Ireland since the Celtic Tiger, since the 1990s, since the early 2000s has been centralized really in Dublin and around the larger cities. And so it's kind of a divide just in terms of where people from outside of Ireland have been migrating. That's also to say that Dublin does have more wealth and more pull, I would say, than a lot of people, than a lot of places in Ireland. And so you'll see if you go down like the River Liffey, there's like the headquarters for Google, KPMG, and all these other major multinational companies. And so you have a large influx of kind of corporate capital and jobs and opportunities in Dublin, which attracts people not only abroad, but also in Ireland. And so there's a large influx of people who migrate throughout Ireland to Dublin. And so people actually, I have a Dublin native who's in my course, and she makes the joke of kind of, you're either from Dublin or you're going to move to Dublin. And that's kind of how she talks about her experience growing up in Ireland, and in particular in the Dublin area.
Well, thank you. And I just want to let you know we're all so pleased for you and proud of you. And we're just finishing up our break, or there would have been some other colleagues on board, I'm sure. So I'm going to share the YouTube link with them, so they'll get to be able to see this. So thank you.
It was a pleasure to see you again. I saw you when you first got in, and I wanted to yell hi, but I couldn't through the screen because the video was playing.
Thank you for that, Joan. Any other questions, folks, comments? Annie, do you have your hand up? Sorry. Oh no, somebody's alarm is going.
That was mine. Sorry.
Oh, it's yours. Okay. I have a question. We have a very strong commitment in the Amherst Irish to the Irish language, Ty. And our two directors just down there from you, Jonathan and Amanda, are both American born and teach a course online, Chomhdháil le Chéile, which is an online series of Irish language courses from beginners to advanced. I'm interested in, you mentioned about the kind of Hiberno English and how the influence of the first native language has influenced the way English is spoken in Ireland. Have you had an opportunity in your Trinity education to take a course on the Irish language?
So actually, when I came to Ireland, I'd promised my grandma, and also I promised my program that I would take an Irish language course. As of now, I still have not taken one. I took a Spanish course my first term, and I was planning on taking an Irish course this term, but it conflicted with my research methods course, so I didn't take it. So the only Irish I know is sláinte, and that's just because we say that at the bars.
Okay. Well, if you want to ever in the future, Jonathan and Amanda's, you can check out their Chomhdháil le Chéile, their ongoing online Irish language course.
Yeah. But they do have a pretty large emphasis, I think, at Trinity and also at universities in general around Irish language. Mm-hmm. And so they give like awards for Irish speakers. They really encourage people to learn it. And there are some opportunities, even if you're not like a native of Ireland, to learn Irish language as well through the clubs and whatnot. There's actually quite a few Americans who are native in Irish, but they just study at Trinity.
Very good. Very good. Jonathan, Amanda have a question there.
Or I was just going to say, absolutely, Ty. There's certainly, with you there, there's certainly no need for you to. We would be your last. We'd be like your last choice while you're there. You know, between you've got what I can't remember the street, but there's the Conor na Gaeilge, the pub there. Great Irish language resources. We have several good friends of ours who are fluent speakers it doesn't matter their, their point of origin there. So there's lots and lots of people. I'm sure you'll have no bother getting connected at any point. So good luck. This is great. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for speaking.
Okay, Tim, away you go.
I wanted to ask you, and again, when you were filming the other day, I didn't get the chance, but it was one of those questions I had running in my mind when you were doing that was, what is it that you think of this experience that you're going to bring back with you that's probably meant the most to you, that could kind of sum up what you've done, whether it was some kind of single event that you went through or something to do with the group of people that you're with or what you've studied? What do you think you could say is the single biggest thing that you're going to be able to bring back to you or with you from this experience?
Yeah, I would say, and it's actually kind of funny, I would say it's a snapshot of Ireland, which I think is what a lot of people bring back, right? So Ireland, I'll know Ireland. I mean, I'll come back, but I'll know Ireland fairly fondly of this time period, and in particular, Dublin. And I think that's something in terms of whether they're my experiences going like hiking or going to the theater or taking classes or just walking around the city center. Those are kind of experiences that would pop into my head when I think of Dublin. And I think that's a pretty common experience for people to take back. I mean, when I was a kid, my grandma would tell me about the snapshot of Ireland that she heard from her parents, right? Oh, it's rolling green hills. It's lush, like it's lush earth. Skies are a bit gray, but don't worry because the food's good. And so when she came over here, that was the impression she had, her snapshot. And she was like, where's all the hills? All I see is gray stone. Your campus is all gray. There's nothing green. And I was like, well, that's because you're in the middle of a city, Grandma. You're not going to find many rolling hills in the middle of Dublin. But I think having kind of that snapshot makes it more of a fond connection, especially in terms of your ethnic identity, right? When you say Irish American, it adds some weight behind it, right? What does that mean to you? Is it just celebrating St. Patrick's Day once a year and eating food, a certain type of food, maybe going to mass, etc.? Or is it more so a connection you have with the actual Ireland, with the actual island, with the people who live there, with the culture that exists there?
And after this experience, Ty, I understand you're heading to Oxford in the fall as a Rhodes Scholar, another prestigious scholarship, which we are indeed very proud of to know you and as a recipient of such a scholarship and the Mitchell. I will be very curious what you will be asked about your experience in Ireland in the Oxford context. And I'd be so tempted to have you back to us again to tell us or to do a comparative analysis of your experience as an Irish American lad raised in Springfield, who's had the bones of a year in Trinity in Dublin and then the bones of a year in Oxford in the UK. I would certainly make a pitch if you'd be interested. We'd love to hear about that comparative analysis.
Yeah, I think it'll certainly be an interesting experience. I'm excited to go over. I do think it'll be very different because obviously Oxford is a small city and it's kind of like Amherst, I suppose. The city is mainly built around kind of a very large campus versus right now Trinity is kind of just a little glimpse into Dublin with a much larger city around it. And so I think it'll certainly be different in terms of that. Also probably in terms of the cultural activities I actually engage in. I don't know if I'd go as far out of my way to engage in kind of random cultural activities. I know like I woke up at like 7 a.m. last week to go try to learn how to play Gaelic football.
Right.
It's the only one to win. Took a lot of hand-eye coordination. I got to the facility, the lady was like, you're the only one that showed up. She's like, do you still want to do it? I was like, I already woke up. Might as well start the game. So I spent about an hour trying to figure out how to dribble and also use my feet and not like trip over my shoelaces. And so I don't know if I necessarily go as far as my way to learn how to play like rugby or a British sport. But cricket, I do certainly think it'll be a good experience. My research will focus on Ireland. So I'll probably be traveling back because I plan on doing my research on traveling communities. Looking at the Irish travelers and also the Roma people. So
great, fascinating. Well, I'm serious about the pitch. If you would like to, we'd love to have you. And on that very topic, it would be fascinating. Is there anyone with a comment, question?
Yeah. I just want to thank you for your presentation, all the facets of it. as kind of window into your experience at this moment in time. And, one of the things that I wonder about, and I think this is too big a question, but, I wonder what it's like being in your shoes, in your skin, in your body as you move in and out of different spaces, and people project things at you. In Ireland, in the US, in different places, certainly will be the case in the UK. And I wonder how you navigate those projections in terms of both their accuracies and inaccuracies, reflecting your own experience. And it's such a huge question, really, but I really do wonder what that's like for you.
Yeah, I would say as a minority, I'm pretty used to navigating those intricacies. I'd say in the US, right, when you say you're Irish American, but then you're Black, a lot of times people look at you, they say, you're not Irish American, you're Black, right? And they don't understand the nuances of you could be both, whether it's my nationality or my ethnicity, etc. And also, it's actually kind of funny because most of the time I have a closer connection to Ireland than they do, because it was their great grandmother who happened to migrate. And so I think that's a nuance that I've always tried to kind of go along in the US. And I think that comes from a sense of self, right? Knowing what you identify as. Is it just this nuanced identity, or is it something you really have an attachment to, right? So I'm also like part Scottish, but you'll never hear me say like, oh, I'm Scottish American, because I have no attachment to that part of my identity. It's not something I feel strong about, versus my Irish American identity is very much attached to my grandmother. And so I think my time in Ireland really reinforces the identity more so than anything, right? Feeling the need that you don't have to explain yourself or your identity to someone, your facet of kind of how you feel or how you relate to others, I think is something that's very interesting. And in Dublin, I would say in Europe as a whole, there's more so, I think all Irish Americans feel this kind of the idea that, oh, well, you're not actually Irish, you're American. And so that's the backside of nuance. Kind of when you go to Europe, they say, you're not Irish American, you're not Scottish American, you're American, and that's it. And so understanding also the nuance of the Irish American experience is very different than the Irish experience. And that's something I've really taken away from it, right? I've never claimed to be Irish. I always say I'm Irish American. But my experience growing up in an Irish American household with my grandmother is very, very different than the experience of someone who grew up in Dublin or Limerick or Galway. It just, even though you may have ancestors who were similar, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 generations ago, it's very different. Whether it's the food you eat or the things you emphasize in terms of religion or your culture or your household, they're just very different. So I would say it really comes from just knowing who you are as a person, right? Not having to question yourself when others also question you, knowing how you identify, why you identify that way, and the connections that you kind of bear with that, whether they be familial, whether they be that snapshot in time you have of Ireland as a place, right, that I talked about earlier. I think it really comes down to knowing who you are and being able to articulate that to yourself, not necessarily to others.
Well said, and thank you.
Well, Ty, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you participate in our event series. We're very proud to claim you, and I'm sorry, we're claiming you with open arms and open heart. One of the great expressions Jonathan taught me, and I had Irish growing up, it was crí isteach. It means a hug. A crí isteach. A crí is a heart, and so when you hug, your hearts go in together. And we take you in our arms now, a crí isteach, for your time in Ireland, for your time over in the UK. And when you return, we'd like to do that in person and to wish you well. We're proud to know you. We're proud to have you part of our series. And Banachdi na féile Padraig Earth. May Padraig bless you and mind you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Ty. Okay, I'm going to close out here. First of all, by thanking Ty for this great conversation today and sharing his experiences with us about being in Ireland and going through this very singular kind of education. We want to also thank Paul Musgrave from UMASS, Poli-Sci Department, for sharing that history of the George Mitchell Scholarship. Kind of gave us a background to the talk today. We want to remember to mention the Government of Ireland Immigrant Support Program and General Counsel Leisha Moore from the Consulate of Ireland in Boston for their continual support and encouragement of our programs. And I would just mention that the snow's almost off the ground. The masks are beginning to come off. Spring has finally sprung as of today. Yeah, exactly. So we'll see you again next month on April the 24th, when our own Annie Rogers will be sharing some Irish poetry with us, old and new. So thank you all for taking the time to be with us, and slán all you. Take care. Thanks, Ty.